If you're an author or plan to be one, get excited because this podcast is for you. Book Marketing Mentors is the only podcast dedicated to helping you successfully market and sell your book. If you're ready for empowering conversations with successful marketing mavens, then grab a coffee or tea and listen in to your host, international best-selling author Susan Friedman.
Welcome to Book Marketing Mentors, the weekly podcast where you learn proven strategies, tools, ideas, and tips from the masters. Every week, I introduce you to a marketing master who will share their expertise to help you market and sell more books. Today, my special guest is a renowned entrepreneur, accomplished author, and an expert in the world of networking. Robert Butwin has a remarkable track record and has made substantial contributions to the direct sales industry. He stands as a prominent figure in the field. His wealth of experience spans several decades, during which he's achieved remarkable success. He's not only a seasoned entrepreneur, he's also a prolific author and speaker. Robert, it's an honor and a privilege to welcome you to the show. Thank you for agreeing to be this week's guest expert and mentor.
My pleasure, and I'm looking forward to sharing some insights and things that I've learned through a long level of experience that will really help everybody take whatever they're doing to go to the next level.
Perfect. And that's all in relation to the art of networking, which we've had several people on the show who I've interviewed about networking, but I know you've had so many years of experience with this and you're so good at it. In fact, that's how you and I connected, was somebody networked and said, hey, I think you should meet Robert. And you've introduced me to people and it's such a pleasure. So let's dig into this whole idea, this whole topic of networking, because it's something that we know we need to do, Robert, but yet I think there's an element of fear that people have with this, sort of connecting maybe with people they don't know. What about that? How should we even start the process?
One of the keys, and you mentioned fear, and I love the acronym of fear: face everything and rise. The point is, when I started networking back in 1983, and part of my backstory of how I started and why I started is coming out of Minnesota at that point in time, and always appreciating following different sports teams. The Minnesota Gophers, and that was the college I graduated from. The Minnesota Gophers had a record of 1 win and all the rest losses. They were outscored by their opponents 3-1. And the person that I look at as the grandfather in networking, Harvey Mackay, who wrote the book Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, he brought in a pristine person to turn around the Minnesota Gophers, which was Lou Holtz. And within 2 years, he had ended up having them go to one of the bowl games. But, he did that through networking. And I heard the expression that your net worth is in direct relationship to the value of your network. So at that point, I decided to take networking extremely serious back in 1983. And I've gone on and it's made me a lot of money, but it's also helped me develop really good relationships with some amazing people, which we can talk about later. But I think about when I started, for example, when I started, even though I thought I was an extrovert, as I really started to realize I wasn't an extrovert. I was what people would refer to as a situational extrovert. I learned to get out of my comfort level and do the things necessary that would allow me to create the success that I was looking to create in my life.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, Harvey Mackay, I know Harvey through the National Speakers Association. What a great guy. And also, as you rightly say, he is an amazing networker. Over the years, the people that he's attracted to him, it just goes on and on. I love the idea of being a situational extrovert. I think that's fun. I never even thought about that. And I think there's an element of that I carry as well, because I always thought that I was an extrovert. And I think in my 20s, 30s, 40s, I was much more of one. But as I've aged over the years, I was like, I've tended towards being more of an introvert. but yet I still enjoy meeting people, and people who I interview on this show are amazing, amazing people. So, yes, let's talk more about this whole idea of strategies when it comes to networking. I think one of the things for me, and I'm hoping that's true with our listeners, is you form a relationship with somebody, you've been introduced to them. How do you keep that relationship going?
The key to keeping a relationship going is you always focus on being of service and value. And it's gotten a lot easier today because of the fact that we're in the informational age. One of the guys that has created a whole system, and he's done it for a long period of time, is a guy named Tom Gay. And he originally created a company called refer.com. Now it's engagepro.com because he sold a refer.com a long time ago. But as you're getting to know somebody, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're networking, they're singular focused, transactional. And that's a big mistake. You want to be more focused on collaborations. It's not necessarily who you're meeting, but if you develop the right relationship with the right people, it's who they can lead you to. I mean, back when I started off, they used to talk about the 6 degree of separation. Well, forget the 6 degree of separation. Today, it's like 1 degree of separation. You know, with social media and people that are out there, if you're developing quality relationships, they will introduce you and open the door to the right people. The key that you want to ask yourself when you're networking, is my net working when I'm networking? Meaning, are you developing the right relationships, or are you just continually doing the wrong things and continually just out there networking, but not getting the kind of results that you're really looking for? So the way to develop long-term relationships, and what I take a look at, and it goes back to the college in Southern California, USC, which is understand who you're speaking to by asking the right questions. Don't think about focused on transaction. If you do things properly, they will either open the door or have the right kind of collaboration. So I want to understand. It's like, what do you do? What are you doing to expand your network? Ask those kind of questions of who, what, why, where, and when. And focus on the S, which is be of service and value. One of the key things that has allowed me to create the kind of success for a long period of time is reciprocity. I'm focused on how can I give the person something based on the fact that I've understanding them, understanding what I can do. For example, Susan, when you and I met, I started asking questions and I reintroduced you to a longtime acquaintance of yours. So that's part of how you can be of service or value, or you can guide them to some digital information, or I mean, there's multiple different ways that you can do it. And then the C in the USC is focus on that human to human connection. Think about collaborations. So again, USC, focus on being of value. And people are much more intuitive today than ever before. They can tell if the only thing that you're thinking about is transactions, and then they're going to resist developing a solid relationship.
Yeah. Value, reciprocity, focus on that idea of service. I think that's so cool. I know that I have this conversation with many authors. They say they want to go out there and just tell people, they've written a book. Don't you want to buy the book type of thing? And I'm like, no, no, no. People are not interested in buying books. They're buying what that book's going to do for them, the value that that book is going to give them. But that value also comes from the author, because the author authored this book and has shared strategies that have worked, proven techniques in certain industries, certain areas of expertise, just like, you and networking. One of the things that you touched on, and I want to dig deeper in, are the mistakes that we make in this environment, Robert, because it's open to mistakes. Let's talk about some of the common mistakes that you find when people get involved, or with the whole idea of networking.
Sure. First of all, one of the biggest mistakes is they're not branding themselves. You want to brand yourself. The book is just an extension of yourself. You want to maybe tell your story, the purpose of why you ultimately wrote the book for whatever reason that is. But, the other part of the mistakes is they're too focused on transactions rather than collaborations. Networking's like opening a bank account. You need to make deposits before you can make withdrawals. If you're just out thinking about me, it's how you're creating a team. When I'm networking, I focus on developing a team of people so that I can outsource the things that I don't want to do. I like to stay in my state of genius, which is connecting and being of value to other people. The biggest mistake that they make is they're too focused on the transaction. Because again, it goes back to what I mentioned, the 6 degrees of separation. If people really understand your heart, what you're passionate about, why you're doing what you're doing, they're going to be more likely to introduce you to the right people.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I love this analogy of opening a bank account and you have to make deposits rather than just focusing on the withdrawals. I mean, that is just perfect for this. Really love that. I think that something else that you mentioned, staying in your state of genius rather than thinking, oh, I have to be all things to all people, which often is the case, especially in the beginning when you're starting your own business or you've written your book. And yes, I think that's something too that people get caught up in, and being focused on being them focused rather than you focused, which I believe is what you've been saying too, is just focus on the other person, find out more about them, what they're interested in. What's another big mistake, Robert?
Part of what people want to be taking a look at, especially as authors, it's like when you're talking with people, and it's like when you and I met, I've got a whole list of different Zoom accounts that people can network at. It's like, how do you get on stages? A lot of the times, a lot of people are not developing a list. You want to, number one, be always expanding your list of connections. And then a mistake that they make quite often when they're networking that I see a lot of people make is they abuse their list, meaning that, today we're all very busy. And I don't have time to look at somebody's email every single day, every single week. They're abusing their list. So as far as networking, you've got to have clarity and intention. It's to create meaningful relationships. And again, if you're focused on being of service and value, people can tell that. So the mistakes that they're making is they're not making that human to human connection, figuring out how they can really connect, asking the right questions, developing the right kind of relationships. And when you do that properly, consistently, you're going to develop really meaningful relationships.
So then there's an element of mindset when you go into even networking, whether it's in person or whether it's online through social media, or you and I met via Zoom. What's the mindset? What's that expectation of that, let's say, that first interaction?
My mindset is in the first interaction, I want to get to know that other person. I know that there's something because I've developed the resources, the wisdom, the insights that will help them, but I want to know who they are, what they're doing, and how I can be of value to them is my first mindset. And again, if they start asking you what you do, I keep it short and sweet. I'll tell people I'm an elite networker and a strategist because I want to shift back to focus on them. It's not about me. I want to figure out what can I do that will have value to them. You mentioned about in-person networking, and that's where I cut my teeth on, of course. But ultimately, in the in-person networking, I see people get into these cliques, and they'll be talking too long to the same people, rather than being able to excuse themselves and say, "It's been great to connect with you, but in the meantime, let me continue networking, so maybe I can find something that would be of benefit to you." So if your mindset is always benefit to the other person, how I can be of service and value, and how I can consistently position myself of doing that. And again, it's having the patience. If you consistently do it for a long period of time, ultimately you're going to meet the right people. It's like the old saying, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince or princess. You've got to shake a lot of hands, knowing that if you consistently do it, the right people show up. There's an old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I've done it for a long period of time. And when I do it for a long period of time, ultimately I'm going to find and develop the right relationships and, find the right people.
One of the things that you demonstrated so beautifully, Robert, was how to disengage yourself from someone. I think, as you rightly said, especially and this happens more in the in-person situation when you're networking, that you're with somebody, you start this conversation, and then it's like, well, I don't want to spend the whole evening with this person or the whole afternoon. I want to get around. But being able to disengage, sort of very strategically and politely, I think people find really hard that idea. I think you demonstrated that beautifully. And listeners, go back and listen to that again because Robert did a great job with that. So you've had this first interaction, you found out about this person. At what point do you say, yes, I want to continue this relationship, or maybe this isn't the right relationship for me to put time and energy into?
Before I do that, I want to go back to the mistake for something because something just came to
Absolutely.
mind today because most things are on Zoom. And even though I cut my teeth originally in the in-person networking, I find it much more effective and efficient on Zoom. And so one of the big mistakes I see people make when they're networking on Zoom, they're trying to sell in these breakout rooms. The biggest thing that you really want to do when you're networking on Zoom is say something one way or the other, or offer referrals to the other person, or somehow, if you see somebody that you haven't seen or that say something in the private chat. Great seeing you here. But the biggest mistake that I see people make on Zoom is the fact that they're trying to pitch on a first date rather than set it up for the follow-up. The fortune is in the follow-up or the follow-through. The biggest thing that I do in the follow-through, which is going back to what you were talking about, Susan, is I want to go deeper with the person. I want to really understand what's going on in their world. And once I understand what's going on their world, and it goes back to reciprocity, I focus on what can I do that would be of value to them before I start off. And then again, I'm watching to see where that is going to go. I leave the door open. I'm going to send something in the follow-up. It's great connecting with you. And I look forward to our next conversation. And so my whole purpose is to be of service and value and set the stage for the next conversation.
That's so important, that follow through, because you're right. I've seen this many times and been in umpteen breakout rooms where you're absolutely right. People give their little spiel, and part of that is, hey, let me tell you what I sell. As I said, I've got a book. So it's very transaction oriented. It's me focused rather than you focused. Part of that too is the introduction. I'm always interested how people introduce themselves. I think even in just that, whatever that one or two lines is of their introduction, you can tell straight away, are they interested in making a connection to take this further as a relationship potentially, or are they just interested, well, hey, maybe I can get you interested in the service or product that I'm selling?
Let me jump in about the introductions. I'll give everybody a couple of real key ways to do it. Two different ways. One of them, 7 key words. The first 3 of the 7 is you know how. Many people, when they're networking, now it depends upon what you're doing, what follows those first 3 words. You know how many people, when they're networking, are not making meaningful connections? What I do is are the next 4 words. What I do is whatever relates to what that other person is. That's one way. And I would like to offer you a complimentary, not a free, a complimentary 15-minute session where I can help you as it relates to what you're doing. So that's one thing that they can do. The second thing that I've learned is your pipe, your PIPE. Your purpose is the first P, your I is your interest, the second P is your passion, and the third P is your experience. And you can do that in 1 to 2 minutes. You got to have simple, profound messaging. My purpose in relationship to what I do is to live a life of meaning based on helping other people. I'm passionate about getting people real results. And then my interest is the fact that I see many people do whatever. Actually, my interest is before the other P. I'm sorry, a little bit out of order. My experience is the fact that I've been networking for over 35 years. So again, if you got some kind of format or foundation as it relates to, and the more that you practice it, I love acronyms. I've got an acronym for pitch, which is PITCH, practice and perfect your presentation. A couple of different P's. Your intention when you're pitching is to say something, because the magic happens when you do the one-on-one. So my intention is to say something that the person says, I need to get to know that person. T is think about who you're speaking with because you've done your explorations. The C is clarity in your communications, focus on connections. And the H is how and why they want to get back to you. When you're in a networking event, your whole focus is to set up the one-on-one so that you have a chance to get to know the other person. We met in a networking group, but unless we had the one-on-one, we wouldn't be having this conversation today.
Great. I'm a great believer in acronyms for things because that's what you remember. I mean, they're so fun. And those 7 key words, brilliant. You know how, whatever. What I do is. And this is great material just to start that conversation, because I think that too is where people are not sure where to go. How do I start this conversation with someone rather than just blurting out, hey, my name is Susan Friedman and I run Aviva Publishing and I publish books. It's all about me.
Exactly. And let me give you another example because it's about a person that you and I both know, Jim Feldman. When I originally met Jim, I said I'm an out of the box thinker. And he very politely as Jim ever does it, says, that's funny because I've made my whole living within the box thinking. I'm going to bring this around to as it relates to networking. He says, if you're out of the box, all you can see is the outside of the box. If your mindset is the fact that everybody that you're talking with has some kind of a problem, he says, I deal with in the box, understanding 3D thinking, understand the depth of the other person's problem. See, if you're doing your proper exploration, you're understanding where they're at. The second D is the distance to the solution. And the third D, as it relates to networking, is the determination of them to solve their problem. For example, just yesterday, I was on a networking call with somebody, and we're supposed to be in a breakout room for 5 minutes. Everybody's supposed to get like a minute and a half to talk. Well, this guy went on and went on. And finally, the other lady said, first of all, you didn't answer the questions. And ultimately, you just pitched us. Well, the guy started to try to answer the questions. I went back because it was still back of a pitch. And I said very politely, are you open to some feedback? The guy said yes. And so I started to very tactfully, strategically give him the feedback, and he didn't really like the feedback. So he jumped off the call. So again, that's not the kind of person that I'm going to ever have any kind of a relationship with, because again, it goes back to what we've been talking about. He was too eye-centered. A couple of different examples.
Oh, that's great. And that happens because
Yes.
you're right. Maybe people get offended if you're going to, as I say, give them feedback. But was he open? No, he wasn't open. That fixed mindset and that growth mindset, well, sounds as if he probably was of a fixed mindset. Robert, this has been amazing. Such practical information. Listeners, just in the few minutes that I've had with Robert, I mean, you've gotten several different techniques, and I invite you to go back and listen to this brilliance. And this is a great segue, Robert, for you to tell us how our audience members can get hold of you. And I believe you have a little something that you want to share with them.
I do. I've got a free gift that normally I sell for $495 that will be complimentary to you based on whatever you're doing. I'm happy to demonstrate and help you as it relates to elevating and accelerating your success as it relates to you. And the best way to do that is book a time on my calendar. It's Calendly, CALENDLY.com / my last name, Butwin, BUTWIN. And I will focus on what I can do to help you as it relates to what you're doing to accelerate and elevate the things in your life.
That's beautiful. And that's a great way, listeners, to get a hold of Robert. And really, he is so sincere. I mean, just every bone in his body, he really is just a true gentleman. And he's truly interested in how he can be of service. And that's one of the main reasons, too, that I invited him, because that's the kind of attitude and this idea of giving rather than just taking, which I think is something that runs through many of the guests that I have on the show. Can't say all of them, but most of them. Any of them. Robert, that's wonderful. And as you know, we always end off giving our listeners a golden nugget. What would you like to share as your parting words of wisdom?
I'm going to share two of them, which I talked about. First one is your net worth is in direct relationship to the value of your network. And it's something that you can definitely master. There's an art as it relates to networking, how you attract the right people into your life, how you retain the right relationships, and the transformation they're going to have because they've got a relationship with you. And the second one is the fact that networking is like opening a bank account. You need to make deposits before you can make withdrawals.
That one really just sticks in my mind. I can just visualize that. It's beautiful. Thank you really for sharing your wisdom, your breadth and depth of experience. I know perhaps we've just put our toe in the water, but listeners, there's more. Please do take Robert up on, spending time with him and just learning more about how you might be able to form a relationship with this incredible gentleman. And by the way, Jim Feldman, who Robert mentioned earlier, we did an interview with him a few weeks ago. Go back and check that out too. He talked about the power of AI. So, Robert, thank you so much. And listeners, if your book isn't selling the way you wanted or expected to, let's you and I jump on a quick call together to brainstorm ways to ramp up those sales. You've invested a whole lot of time, money, and energy, and it's time you got the return you were hoping for. Go to brainstormwithsusan.com to schedule your free call. And in the meantime, I hope this powerful interview sparks some ideas you can use to sell more books. Until next week, here's wishing you much book and author marketing success.